Hello everyone, welcome back to topic 5, Pembinaan Peradaban Majmuk di Malaysia. Now, before we get into topic 5, I would first like to say a quick thank you to everyone who took the time to leave comments on my previous videos. Some of you even asked me to continue with lesson 5 all the way to lesson 9, and I'm really happy to know that these videos have been helpful for you, okay? Now, just to share with you, right, the notes that I am referring to for these videos are gathered purely from online resources, okay? So if you have your own notes, lecture materials, or a specific topic that you would like me to cover, feel free to share them with me. Okay, it would really help me to create better and more relevant videos based on the materials that you are actually using for your studies. Okay, now with that said, let's dive into today's topic. Now, the title itself is Pembinaan Peradaban Majmuk di Malaysia. Now, before we understand how a peradaban majmuk was developed in Malaysia, we will first need to understand one important question. What exactly does peradaban majmuk mean? Okay, so once we understand the meaning of these words, right, the rest of the topic will become much easier for you to digest. Okay, so let's break it down together. Think of Malaysian civilization like a layered cake lapis, okay? Each historical period added another layer, okay? The earliest layer came from the indigenous people of the Kepulauan Melayu, okay? Later, interactions with India, China, and the Middle East added new culture, religious, linguistic, and economic influences, okay? So when Europe came to colonize, right, they added another layer. And today, globalization and digital technology are adding yet another layer. Okay? So the phrase peradaban majmuk can be translated as multi civilizational society or plural civilization. Okay, it refers to the civilization that we see today being shaped by different civilizations and cultural influences that interact with one another over a long period of history. Okay, so the important point is that Malaysia's civilization did not just happen after Merdeka in 1957. Okay, it developed through centuries of interactions in the Kepulauan Melayu. So this is why I asked you to imagine it as a cake lapis. Okay, there's multiple layers which actually form the peradaban majmuk. All right. Now here's the synopsis. Take your time to read through the synopsis. All right. Now I will straight away start translating them or explaining them to you. Malaysian civilization is a combination of several major civilizations. I told you earlier, isn't it? Now, it began with the indigenous civilization of the Malay world, didahului oleh peradaban Pribumi alam Melayu. Okay, it was influenced by India, China, and Middle East. Western civilization came later on. Okay, globalization created another layer of influence, that is the peradaban globalisasi. And then nation building began after Merdeka in 1957. What is nation building? Pembinaan peradaban yang beridentitikan Malaysia. Okay? Then the state developed institutions such as bureaucracy and 5-year development plans. So these are the terms that you may want to remember in Bahasa. Okay, so the 5-year development plan is pembangunan 5 tahun. Okay, bureaucracy, sistem birokrasi negara. Okay, remember all these terms. Okay, then economic development preceded nation building. All right, so pembangunan ekonomi happened first, and then pembinaan bangsa happened. Okay, so political parties and election contributed to nation building. There were different bangsa idaman. Okay, all right. Building a Malaysia civilization is challenging. So this is basically what you'll be learning or covering in this topic 5. Okay. Now, before we begin, let's take a look at the objective and learning outcomes for this topic. Okay, the objective is to understand the process of nation building. proses pembinaan negara bangsa in Malaysia through the diversity of civilization. So, what are we actually going to learn from this topic? Our main objective is to understand how Malaysia developed as a nation through its diverse civilization. And by the end of this lesson, right, you should be able to explain how the Malaysian nation, okay, negara bangsa Malaysia, was formed and analyze Malaysia as a nation state from the perspective of civilization. When I say perspective of civilization, it means perspective peradaban. All right? So let's dive into today's topic. All right, now let's look at the first part of this topic, the social history of the influence of world civilization. Okay, sejarah sosial pengaruh peradaban dunia. Peradaban majmuk di Malaysia dibentuk melalui gabungan beberapa peradaban besar dunia yang berinteraksi sepanjang sejarah alam Melayu. Okay, so when we talk about Malaysian civilization today, we need to understand that it was not formed by one civilization alone. Remember that. Instead, Malaysian civilization developed through centuries of interaction between different civilization in the alam Melayu. Okay, so there are four major layers that you need to take note on. Okay, the first one, peradaban pribumi alam Melayu, indigenous civilization of the Malay world. Number two, peradaban Asia, India, China, Timur Tengah, which is Asian civilizations. Okay, third one, peradaban Barat, Western civilization. And the last one, peradaban globalization. All right. Now let's try to understand these points better. Okay. So the first one, peradaban pribumi alam Melayu. Okay. Asas peradaban di Nusantara berasaskan budaya dan nilai tempatan Melayu. Perkembangan bermula dari zaman prasejarah, proto-sejarah, kerajaan Melayu hingga zaman moden. Okay, so the first layer is the indigenous civilization of the Malay world, the pre-bumi. Okay, before the arrival of foreign influences. Okay, try to imagine them. All right, the people of the Alam Melayu or Kepulauan Melayu already had their own culture, their very own tradition, language, belief system, and ways of life. Okay, so this is important because we sometimes make the mistake of thinking that civilization only began when foreign influences came. No, the Malay world already had established societies and kingdoms. All right. So, what are the examples that we have? Now, here you can see Kedah Tua, Langkah Suka, okay, Malay kingdoms such as the Melaka, Johor Riau, okay. Now, let's move on to the second point. Peradaban Asia, contoh India, China, Timur Tengah. Okay. Now, let's focus on India dan China. Kemasukan agama Buddha, Hindu, sistem pemerintahan, adat bersam, pemakaian dan bahasa. Okay. Now, this is the second layer. The second layer is the influence of other Asian civilization, peradaban Asia, particularly India and China. The Malay world was strategically located along important maritime trade routes. Okay, we have learned this before, isn't it? So, because of this, people from different part of Asia came into contact with the communities living here. Okay, if you can't remember this, go and watch our previous videos. All right. So you can already imagine how they were already living there. So that's how the interaction happened when uh, people from other parts of Asia came over. Okay. Now, these influences should not be understood simply as foreign culture arriving and replacing the local culture. No, huh? Instead, local communities interacted with these influences and adapted them in different ways. Okay, try to imagine that, all right? Now, that's actually what makes the idea of peradaban majmuk very interesting. Now let's move to the next point, the Timur Tengah Arab atau Islam. Now here, another major influence came from the Middle East through the spread of Islam. Islam gradually became deeply connected with the social, political, and cultural development of the Malay world. Okay, for example, we have Islam, JavaScript, legal values, social institutions, right? So one useful example is Javi. Okay, Javi is an adapted form of the Arabic script that was historically used to write Malay. Okay, and interestingly, Javi has not completely disappeared. Okay, it continues to appear in certain culture, religious, and educational contexts in Malaysia today. So again, we can see how historical influences can survive and adapt into the modern period. Okay, there are still students or lessons being taught on the Javi words. Okay, so the next point is peradaban Barat. Okay, the next major layer came through Western colonial powers. The Portuguese arrived in Malacca, remember? Then followed by the Dutch. And then came the British influence, and they became particularly significant. Right. So the British period was especially important in shaping modern administrative and economic structure. They are the one who played a very significant role. All right. So the key points for this British influences that you can actually take point of is bureaucracy, legal institutions, infrastructure, vernacular education, okay, capitalist economic structures. So what you can do is you can make little short notes on these points. Now, something that you will also need to remember. This does not mean that everything introduced during colonialism was positive or negative. Okay, so the important point for this topic is that colonialism fundamentally changed the social, economic, and institutional structure of the region, right? Because otherwise, you try to imagine how they used to live before this, but after colonialism happened, how things changed. What are the things that changed? Education system changed. They started having their railway tracks. They started having roads, right? So there are different things that was impacted. So don't just see it as positive, negative. See how it affected and impacted social, economic, and institutional structures. Okay. So, if we put all these influences together, right, we can understand why today Malaysia has such a diverse civilization. Okay, because you see, we have indigenous Malay world, and then came the Indian influence, came the Chinese influence, and then came the Islamic or Middle Eastern influence, the Western influence, and then happened globalization. Okay, so now I hope you understand the meaning of peradaban majmuk. Okay, how did this plural civilization form? Okay, now the last point here that we have is peradaban globalisasi. Okay, globalization, the borderless world. Okay, okay. I think here's where you'll be able to relate to the most. Why? Because the story did not just stop there. In the modern era, right, we entered another stage which is known as the globalization. Okay, what is globalization? Apakah itu maksud globalisasi? It means that interaction between society is no longer dependent only on physical traveling from one place to another place. Because last time they had to travel with their ship, with the boats, right? Physically, they had to travel, right? Now, today, information can travel across the world almost instantly, right? So, and Malaysia is highly connected digitally, okay? So this is one real life example that you can keep in mind. Okay, think about how quickly a trend, okay, a dancing trend, let's say, from another country can reach Malaysia today. A song, fashion trend, food trend like mukbang, right? Movies, okay, all these Gen Z slang words, right? So all this can spread through social media within hours. Correct or not? That is the meaning of dunia tanpa sempadan, borderless world. Okay, can you see how we can actually relate all this today? This creates something very interesting. What is it? Cultural mixing. Okay, a Malaysian today can speak Malay, English, Tamil, Chinese, okay, and other languages so easily. We can eat traditional Malaysian food. We can watch Korean dramas, right? We can listen to K-pop, Western music. We can celebrate Chinese New Year, Deepavali. These are all describing globalization, okay, which is contributing to the kacukan peradaban, the mixing of civilizations, okay. So far we have talked about how different civilization influence Malaysia, right? But now we have to ask a very important question. After all these influences, right, what does it actually mean to have a Malaysian identity? And this is where 1957 becomes important. Okay? Peradaban berintikan Malaysia. Independence and the nation state is the topic here. Something that you may want to remember, okay? 1957 makes the independence of the Federation of Malaya. Okay, in 1963 it marks the formation of Malaysia. All right. Now, after independence, the challenge was no longer simply to govern a territory. The country also had to build a functioning state and develop a shared national identity among a diverse population. Correct or not? This is where pembinaan negara, okay, nation state building comes into picture, which involves creating and strengthening government institutions, laws, administrative system, economic institution, development plan, citizenship, political institution. Okay? So building a country isn't only about declaring independence. Okay. You can't just, declare independence and think that we have already built a country. No. A country also needs proper institutions, infrastructures, economic planning, and systems of government that allow the state to function properly. Right. Now let's move on to the next point, which is pembinaan bangsa, nation building. What we touched earlier was nation state building, pembinaan negara. Now we are covering nation building, pembinaan bangsa. Okay, so a state can be created through institutions, right? But a nation involves something deeper. Now, this is the difficult or the challenging point. Okay, a nation involves something deeper, such as a sense of shared identity, belonging, and common purpose. This is why nation building in Malaysia has been a continuous process. Okay, why? Because Malaysia is diverse in ethnicity, diverse in religion, language, culture, regional identity, historical experiences. Right. That is why pembinaan bangsa is still happening. It's a continuous process. The question is, how can people with different backgrounds develop a shared Malaysian identity while still maintaining their own cultural identities? Okay, so this is where Dasar Perpaduan Negara comes into picture. Dasar Perpaduan Negara, DPN, National Unity Policy. Okay, this actually focuses on strengthening national integration, building national identity. Okay,
Oh, okay.
so if we look at Malaysian civilization from a historical perspective, we can see that it is not the product of one civilization alone. Okay, it developed from indigenous civilization of the Alam Layu, interacted with Indian, Chinese, and Middle Eastern civilization, experienced major transformation under Western colonialism, and is now being continuously influenced by globalization and digital technology. The layering, so imagine the layering, okay? So the challenge after independence was to build a common Malaysian identity from within this diversity. Can you imagine? We have Malays, we have Indians, we have Chinese, we have Sikh, we have many different people here, right? But now we have to integrate a common Malaysian identity. Of course, it's going to be challenging, right? And that is why we talk about both pembinaan negara and pembinaan bangsa, the building of the state, the building of the nation. So, The question now is, how exactly did Malaysia go about building this nation?